Annie Fox, education writer and author of AQA A Level Drama play guide, Our Country's Good. And Rima Georges, actor and Lyric Hammersmith Theatre Springboard trainee, in conversation with Ian Michael, First Nations consultant for Our Country's Good. There are 3 chairs in the centre of a room with grey carpet and floor-to-ceiling windows behind them. Annie Fox is sat on the chair on the right. She's wearing a shirt with large white flowers, navy blue trousers and black trainers. She has short grey hair and is wearing spectacles, along with large blue and yellow earrings. Rima Georges is sat on the chair in the centre. She's wearing a pink shirt, pink shorts and black flip-flop sandals. She has dark brown, shoulder-length curly hair. Ian is sat on the chair to the left. He's wearing a black t-shirt, grey shorts, black socks and white trainers with 3 black stripes on them. He has short black hair.
Firstly, thank you, Ian, for coming to speak to us. I'm just going to start off. Could you please start by giving an acknowledgement of country and explain what it is and what it means to you?
We did this on day 1 of rehearsal. I started off by acknowledging that the story that Our Country's Good is told on is on the lands of the Dharawal and the Gadigal people of the Eora Nations, and pay respects to elders past and present. And we use an acknowledgement of country as an opportunity to pay respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we're on, and pay respects to elders past and present, and any First Nations people that are in a room, either that be a meeting or at the start of a play or any kind of event. And it's used as a kind of a practice to acknowledge that myself as a First Nations person on somebody else's land is a visitor. And throughout thousands of years of practicing culture, anybody that would travel across countries or lands would have to be welcomed. And so me as a visitor on somebody else's land, I always pay respect to that land and the people that are the traditional custodians of that land.
It's not so much in the culture here to do that. And so they, I think, probably still don't know quite what that would mean.
Yeah.
So it's an announcement that is made at the beginning.
Yeah, it can be done by anybody. It's either, usually in theatre, it's a recording that we record during rehearsals and then we play at the start of a performance. And usually they're done in meetings or at the start of events. You know, it's kind of a very new practice as well that we've found in Australia. I think probably in the past, 10, 11, 12 years, it's become something that is now done regularly.
What is your role as a First Nations consultant, and what does it involve when working with the creative team in this production?
It's something I've never done before, so I'm still kind of learning what it is, and I think it's a really wonderful opportunity. And a lot of the work that I've done has been with Timberlake, and a lot of it has just been having conversations. Because what an incredible opportunity to be able to kind of bring this play forward, or continue the legacy of this play, but really think about the idea of the past and the present and the future of it, in the same way we're thinking about the history of the First Fleet and the history of Australia and the colonial history. And it has to start with conversations, which then leads to acknowledgement, which then leads to deep thinking and truth-telling. But Rachel and I spoke about my experience of being a First Nations person in Australia and talking a lot about kind of what's happening in our communities there and what, I guess, the landscape of Australian politics are like, and the, very kind of broad history lesson that we had in about half an hour. Then very quickly, Timberlake and I started having Zooms. So I spoke a lot about my personal experience, and Timberlake would kind of provoke me with questions, and we would also really lead with that original text as well. I think that was always really important, was to come back to that, and then why she'd written that character and why it was in certain moments within the script, why are they placed there. So always leading with the original text, but also just being able to talk openly and freely about my experience and to be able to bring my own personal research and ideas and opinions to her, and for her to be able to take them and put them in these new editions, which are still kind of works in progress. We're still having conversations in the room right now.
Because it was written in the past as well, in a particular time, did you do your own research with older generations?
I had a conversation with a man I know, Tim Bishop, in Sydney, and I just needed to have a conversation with him about, the reasons why I was coming onto this project, and to really just ensure that I was doing the right thing, and that I was the right person to do it. We're also working with Matthew Doyle, who is a very highly respected community leader in Sydney, and he's working on the language translation for us. So an incredible part of also being able to bring this play forward and the opportunity to give this character more agency and presence is that there will be a First Nations language spoken in this production of Our Country's Good, which is incredible. That language will be spoken in London, which is so far away from where it lives and where it exists. But the conversation that we're kind of having with place and this place, like, they're so connected because of colonial history.
What are the challenges that you would say the First Nations people still face that this play is seeking to highlight? So with your conversations with Rachel and Timberlake, like, what are you specifically trying to highlight?
Yeah, well, I think it's always really important to think about the ideas of the play, and Timberlake really wanting to investigate the justice system and what that meant of a particular time in the 1700s. And like, it's really impossible and would be really remiss of me not to think about everything that happened in 1738 to now. Then, like, there's so much progression in that country, but there's also so much that is so wrong. And there's so many things in the script still that just feel really resonant. We also think, just with reading the play this afternoon, about this idea of convicts and those, like the jailers hanging people, and what that felt like and what that would do to their psychology, and that didn't just happen to the convicts that they'd taken on those ships. It then happened to the First Nations people of that land. There's a story about Rottnest Island, which is, I think, essentially took young men and boys from all over WA, thousands and thousands of kilometres away, and marched them from wherever they were in chains, and then put them on this island. And that island wasn't a prison. They then took a group of young Aboriginal men, sent them to the island, built the prison, which then they put more Aboriginal men and boys in. And the prison essentially had a quadrangle, and within that quadrangle the other prisoners would watch other young men and boys be hung. And so the conversation we're having in the script about what these convicts and their experiences are, it's like the convicts and the colonisers, and what they were doing to each other, they then went on to do all around the country for hundreds of years and continue to do so. So the idea of the justice system, I think about this play, then I think about Rottnest Island, and I think about these young people who are being locked up at the age of 10. I think about there's certain detention centres in the Northern Territory where 100% of that prison population are Aboriginal people. And statistics like in New South Wales, where this play is now set, something like 66% of the adult prison population are Aboriginal people. But we don't really even make up 3% of the entire country's population.
So it's hugely disproportionate at the time.
In a huge way. And that's just the justice system. But then there are things like health, like in terms of diabetes, in terms of cardiovascular diseases, which you can link directly to mission managers and station managers paying their workers in white flour, in white bread, in white sugar, in tobacco, in alcohol. It is inherently linked to what's happening to our people now.
So one of the things that you're helping, I think, Timberlake with is to revisit the character that was called the Aborigine and now is called the First Nations narrator. Yeah. Is that right?
Yes.
Can you talk to us a little bit about how that character is being developed and changing, and what input you've had into those changes?
Yeah, there's a lot more than 6 lines this time. At the moment, there's kind of like 3 monologues or speeches that this character has. And they really have just come from the conversations, which then Timberlake's dramatised and used, which then we'll kind of insert the language translation into as well. And then what happens then is Nayara, who's playing the First Nations narrator, will come into rehearsals, and then I'm sure then the process and the shaping of those then change again, because her experience is very different to mine. As of like there's 250 language groups now in Australia. And so all of our experiences are very different.
Am I right in thinking that instead, often when the character is portrayed, it's in, with say body tattoos or in some very, very little clothing, but they're not looking at that for this production. It's a more modern take on it, which again, a little bit, we were talking about the Acknowledgement, about looking back and looking forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And, in the sense of like costuming, I think in terms of them being in contemporary clothing, that definitely speaks to the presence of our people being now and is very much thriving and surviving. But like the things that Nayara is saying as that character, the First Nations narrator, are very much linked to history. But they, as I said before, like all of the things that I feel as an Aboriginal person, as a First Nations person, like they're all linked. Like Australia is a very young country, and we don't do a very good job at acknowledging our history.
How important is theatre for making people more culturally aware? What is theatre's role in doing that? But also, how can it be something that is authentic and genuine and deep?
Yeah, well, I mean, First Nations theatre, especially black theatre in Australia, was inherently born out of being political and speaking to exactly what was happening in the time in that country to those people then. And there's a number of incredible First Nations theatre makers and writers that people should look for. And they were doing this incredible job at playing with form and style, but also really maintaining this sense of like what it was to be black in that country at that time. I feel like theatre is such an incredible tool to open up empathy and to shift perspective. And, you always hope that theatre will do that when you go out to make a piece of theatre as an artist. And I take the deep responsibility when I'm telling First Nations stories, and I just directed a play at Sydney Theatre Company called Stolen, which is a play that has been on the Australian curriculum for 20 years. And it's about the stolen generations, which is a policy that was kind of born around 1901 to remove children and essentially to assimilate them and to breed out their culture.
So were they adopted into white families?
White families, or they were put onto missions and reserves. But they were taken without consent. And then, the policy and the acts changed and shifted over time. But the action has remained the same. And I think that's something really interesting about this play is acts and policies may have changed, but the actions have remained the same and continue to do damage. And that was a play that, it's had a lot of touring life, but it never really had many main stage productions. And the responsibility to tell that production on a main stage in Sydney with 5 Aboriginal actors, and to the ability to kind of bring that play forward, even though it was written 26 years ago, was an incredible opportunity. And I really hoped that it would have an effect on an audience the same way we made it. And we had something like 2,500 school groups come through. And the effect that I could see that it was having on these people, these young people who then would be the ones making the policies and the actions and, shifting our country in a way in the future, was incredible. And I don't take that for granted. And I think theatre is such an incredible, powerful experience. It's something where people sit in the dark with each other and their heartbeats start to, pulse the same and their breaths start to breathe. It's an incredible human thing.